In this episode, we're on location. Please bear with any compromise in video or audio quality. Enjoy the interview. Take care. See you on the other side. Bye. Welcome to the South America podcast. From the Andes to the Amazon and almost to Antarctica. This is a very special episode because we're on location. Live from Ecuador. Not live when you're seeing it. Anyway, I am privileged to introduce my very special guest for today, Dr. Janis Nuckolls. Janis, would you please introduce yourself to everyone watching and listening? What is it you do and where are you located normally?
Hi Austin, thanks so much for having me. I am Janis Nuckolls. I am a professor of linguistics at Brigham Young University in Utah. I'm here in Ecuador doing research as well as leading a study abroad for 14 undergraduate students and a few graduate students as well. And I've been working on this dialect of the Kichwa language for many years now, so it's really my passion to be here and to enjoy the people who I've known for years and to catch up with their lives as well as to learn, always learning new things about their language.
Excellent. So you mentioned the Kichwa language. Now, previously on the podcast, we've had various people talk about Quechua. And I know that this is a thing you get all the time. Could you give people listening and watching just a little sense of, okay, so what is Quechua, what is Kichwa? We've mentioned before, those of you who didn't catch the earlier episodes, somebody here or there has mentioned Quechua and what it is, that it's a language family, etc. Links to both of those episodes will be in the description, but just as a refresher, so what is Quechua, what's Kichwa, what's going on here?
Okay, so to avoid confusion, Kichwa is also distinctive from Quiche Mayan, which is another point of possible confusion. Actually, Kichwa is simply the Ecuadorian name for a dialect of the Quechua family of languages, and there's nothing really mysterious about it. I can't tell you why people started calling it Kichwa rather than Quechua, but it is a distinctive dialect. In fact, it's even within Ecuador, there are many varieties of Kichwa. Kichwa in Ecuador is a relative latecomer. It's fascinating for a lot of reasons. It has probably been greatly affected by other languages that were already being spoken here before the Quechua language reached here. So there are many speakers of different languages in this area. We're in Amazonian Ecuador. There are speakers of Chicham languages. There are speakers of Wao Tedero, which is another linguistic isolate. It's been speculated that this dialect of Kichwa has been affected by Barbacoan languages as well. So lots and lots of interesting things to explore.
Absolutely. And speaking of exploring, how is it that you came to explore this here? How is it that you ended up here? Why are we ultimately having this conversation today? Maybe take us back a little. Where did it all begin for you, actually?
Okay, well, actually it all began a number of years ago at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I was pursuing an undergraduate degree in linguistics and needed to take a non-Indo-European course, which was Quechua, the language I ended up settling on, taught by Louisa Stark in the Department of Linguistics. So I taught that language. I was very interested in some of the things that our grammar pointed out about the language, and very keen on going to visit speakers in Ecuador, which I did from, I think 1984 was the first time I actually visited speakers of this language in the Highlands. I did decide though that a lowland Quechua speakers were easier for me to do research with. They were more anxious to speak their language, more easy to get to know, and in general they were friendlier, it seemed. And also I love the climate better than the Highlands of Ecuador.
I see. So I guess it would be helpful to point out that in case you don't know, this Quechuan family is most famous maybe for its Highland varieties in Quechua in Ecuador through through kind of the spine of South America that is the Andes, right?
Right.
And that in Peru, in Bolivia, and even a tiny bit in Argentina, and a tiny bit also further north in Colombia, there are speakers of the Quechuan family, I guess, or or macro language, or whatever you want to call it, this conglomeration of variants, to be very neutral, right?
Absolutely.
And that you're saying that, you know, you started some work in these highland varieties in the kind of on the spine of the Andes, and yet you went down the slopes, as it were, and really found an academic home, well, and a physical home too during your field work. In the Amazonian part, in the lowlands.
That's a well put. Thank you. The Highland dialects of Kichwa are very interesting, but many people assume that those are, for example, if you meet people who are interested in language standardization and unifying different dialects to keep the language growing, to keep it vigorous and thriving, the Highland dialects get all the attention. And if you've ever heard of something called Kichwa unificada, which is a standardized variety of Kichwa that people try to promote here in Ecuador, it's largely based on Highland varieties. So I feel as if lowland-speaking Kichwa people have not gotten as much attention grammatically or culturally, actually. And actually, the lowland speakers are far more likely to look east to the Amazonian regions of South America than they are to look west toward the Incas.
Right.
So, although their language is technically part of the Inca diaspora, they are actually much more like Amazonian peoples.
Right,
like
there's
Highland
this.
Inca peoples. Yeah.
Would it be fair to say that there's sort of this interesting, not only confluence of identities, but this disjunction? But linguistically, they look to the Highlands in the sense that they say they speak something similar, and they know this. Right. And we even today actually we were talking with a speaker who said no, they speak very clearly, very well in the Highlands. And other Amazonian peoples, it was, their languages are not as clear for me, or they sound very distinct. This kind of emphasis on the distinction. And yet culturally, as a whole package, you're saying, I think, right?
Absolutely.
That actually, linguistically, they're not the same as the Highlands, but there's this continuum, whereas culturally, as a whole, they're on the Amazonian cultural continuum.
That's exactly right. That's really nicely put. In fact, one of our main linguistic consultants, who we've met, Belgica, she can hear almost any dialect of Quechua, whether it's spoken in Peru or Bolivia, and she's very familiar, and they're all pretty mutually intelligible to her.
Yeah,
so
I see.
That's quite interesting. And yet culturally, she's very Amazonian. She has everything in common with other Amazonian peoples.
It's fascinating. Yeah. I think it is worth pointing out that this consultant, Belgica, is also a phenomenal sort of polyglot herself, and so perhaps she's non-representative in a good way. Her ears seem to be very sharp for these, and attuned to these things anyway. But I think that would be your experience in general, though. You've said before, I think, with people who tend to understand the Andean varieties of Quechuan as well.
For sure,
that this continuum certainly exists in the mind of other speakers too.
It does, and she's not unusual in being a polyglot either.
No, that's true.
When you're living in a very diverse area, linguistically diverse area, you have to learn to speak, or at least have passive reception and knowledge of other languages.
Certainly. So that's a fantastic context, and this linguistic diversity, which we mentioned, which is so interesting, leads me to sort of wonder. So it was a result of exposure to Quechuan varieties in the Highlands through Wisconsin-Madison that led you here, right?
Yes.
You said.
Yes.
So, what was your first field trip like? I guess just to sort of shift gears to how did this look? The practicalities. So, you took a course, you took a module at the university, and then eventually you were. How did that manifest itself that you were able to get here?
I was doing graduate work, undergraduate work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and then I started my PhD program at the University of Chicago, and decided if I was going to be seriously interested in this language for a dissertation, I needed to do at least reconnaissance fieldwork. So my first trip was to the Highlands, very high Highlands, like 11,000 feet high, where my undergraduate Quechua teacher, Carmen Chuquin, advised me to go and visit her mother. I found the situation very, very difficult. A lot of people that I would try to speak Quechua with or Kichwa would not even respond in Kichwa, they would respond in Spanish, or they would look puzzled, or they would laugh. And it was, her mother was living in a very isolated, villages were very isolated and far apart from each other. There were a lot of people doing sheep herding. The weather was very cold. We were literally walking in the clouds while we were there.
Wow.
And spent a lot of time just sitting by the fire trying to keep warm. So climate-wise, it wasn't an environment that was very happy for me. So then I read a book by the anthropologist Norm Whitten called Sacharuna, which means forest person. And I just got very excited about the idea of Kichwa in the rainforest. So I wrote him, we developed a correspondence, and he steered me to some Kichwa-speaking colleagues of his, some consultants that he had been helped by, and was very kind and gave me lots and lots of names of people. So I started working in the lowland area of Ecuador, and immediately bonded with the people and the dialect, although they thought I sounded very strange at first because I was imitating the Highlanders. They were incredibly anxious to speak Kichwa with me, so it got me started on all kinds of good things.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And this first point of contact for you in the Amazon was in the Pastaza region, correct?
Right.
So I should say we're here in a region called the Napo region.
Right.
We're actually right along the Napo River.
Exactly.
Which is lovely to be on. What was that? So yeah, to sort of backtrack in a sense. So you come in from having gone to the Highlands. Was this then a separate trip, or it was on that same trip that you went?
No, it was a separate trip.
Okay.
I had read the book. I already
back in the States.
Back in the States.
Okay.
I had read about the people. I corresponded with Norm Whitten. He was anxious to connect me with his friends here who spoke Kichwa, and I just hit the ground running when I got here. It didn't turn out to be as easy as I thought, because I was very interested in finding monolingual Kichwa speakers, not speakers who were equally comfortable with Spanish. Because a special research interest of mine is idiophones, and idiophones these are expressive words, sometimes just called onomatopoeic. They tend to be fragile in contact situations.
Right.
So I decided I needed to go to a more remote area. So that there were a couple of attempts to work near the Puyo area in a small community named Canelos. That didn't work out. So I went even further east to an area on a community where I had to charter airplanes to get there. But once I did that, I was warmly welcomed. I mean, imagine, Austin, if someone just showed up at your home in the Netherlands and knocked on your door and said, "Hi, I want to learn your language. Can I hang out with you?" That's pretty much what I did.
Yeah.
And but through contacts, of course, I associated with people that were known by other people who knew my anthropologist friend. So, but they were incredibly generous to me with their time and their resources, which I, of course, tried to compensate them in whatever ways I could.
Of course.
But working in a remote area was really life-changing for me, and just an exquisite experience.
That sounds amazing. And an experience that I think fewer and fewer people are able to have as the world globalizes. So it's lovely to capitalize on that chance. It's certainly something I'm attracted to, but of course,
yes.
Who knows where that's still possible.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm sure there are places still. Right. So you hit the ground running, you said. So you start learning Pastaza Quichua in earnest, and then you focus in on these idiophones. You mentioned these sound symbolic or iconic utterances.
Right.
Indeed, sometimes linked with the concept of onomatopoeia in especially like literary studies use this a lot, I think. I have some videos about onomatopoeia and about iconicity in general, both in world languages and also specifically in Turkish, which I can put in the description as well. But just to hone in on that for a second, what got you interested in these sound symbolic utterances, and was that early on? Was that something that just developed out of the field work itself, or did you come kind of with the preconceived idea of working on these?
I love that question. Thanks for asking. So when I started working as an undergraduate on Kichwa, the grammar that we used mentioned them as part of the language. it didn't give a lot of attention to them, but it did mention that they were used. And I just immediately became fascinated by them. And I don't know if I even consciously realized why I was fascinated, but I have had a background in the visual arts, and I've always been interested in visual representation, filmmaking, and things like that. So I think something in me thought that these words were something like an imageic way of expressing oneself. And so, although I'd given up the arts, I felt as if, in a way, I was coming back to something like that, or imageic language, with the study of ideophones.
Yeah, imageic and performative, I think,
and
too, right? Is what you and others have said. And so there's a kind of a performing arts aspect to them.
There absolutely is.
And I also have a theatre background, and so for me that was also something very attractive about these things. I'm sure that resonated on many levels with you. Yeah.
On so many levels. And I can't really explain it. It was just one of these things that I've always been fascinated by, and I'm so glad that it's turned out to be so productive. It's gotten me into so many other it's actually helped me in so many other ways in my studies of linguistics. It's taken me into new terrain in phonology, into new terrain in semantics, the latest thing now is neuroscience. So we started doing a neuroimaging study of idiophones.
I was very fortunate to be able to sit in on this for a bit and learn how it worked. It was absolutely fascinating. As soon as that paper is out, we'll put a description in the, a link in the description as well here when that's out.
Good, thank you very much. I hope our results are exciting. I think they will be, but essentially I'm interested in the idea that many people who study idiophones around the world, they're sometimes called memetics in Japanese, or idiophones in the Africanist tradition, or expressives in the Southeast Asian tradition.
Echoics even too.
Echoic words.
Yeah.
A number of people have actually claimed that they don't have any semantics, that these are words which are essentially meaningful only in specific contexts, that they have no semantics on their own. So I'm really interested in debunking that idea with I've done an analysis of idiophones using semantic features, and now I'm trying to see if these neuroimaging studies will in any way back up what I think might be going on in the brain when people hear idiophones with certain semantic features. So that's the idea behind that study.
Which is something that's fascinating because, of course, it links full circle to lab studies of sound symbolism with made-up words. Many people may be familiar with the Kikibuba experiments. I say experiments because actually there's a whole series of them using it, but of course the initial ones by Köhler with Maluma Tekete and Buba Kiki with Ramachandran and Hubbard, etc. And this idea that you can have this very naturalistic kind of field work approach to documenting sound symbolism in language, but on the other, sort of isolate certain variables experimentally. And these have been very separate tracks until recently. And these tracks have been united by my former MA supervisor, Machiguenga, in the Netherlands, and also a bit in my yet unpublished MA thesis. And what I like about this, though, is that this actually takes it and makes it even more naturalistic than it was in either of those two, because it's real recordings of sort of real Kichwa idiophones, with the intonation, with everything, with the sort of human context in a way that they deserve, and yet isolated in a very intelligent way, so as to be experimentally viable as well.
And Mark has of course been a pioneer in this field of study, with his emphasis on the importance of intonation beyond just beyond the segmental level of sound. Which his initial study did, of course, actually manipulate as well, I should say, to give it very much due credit. Fantastic study. So I've been very inspired by Mark's work, and I think it's really important to do more of these kinds of cognitive studies among people who are not from Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic countries. Indeed. Some of you may be familiar with the weird acronym, which is what that spells out, right? That it's abnormal and yet is also, because of being Western educated, industrialized, rich, and indeed democratic. Democratic, so that's one thing that this study is offering. Another thing, right away, just preliminarily, I can say that the study was designed in a way that we wanted to compare how people would react to ordinary words. So a list of ordinary words, a short list of ordinary words were heard, and then a list of idiophones, just scrambled in different orders by a program called PsychoPy. So it doesn't matter whether it's a sound idiophone or a motion idiophone or a visual idiophone, they were all scrambled in different orders. But what we noticed right away was that when people heard the ordinary words, they would often react by repeating the words out loud.
Fascinating.
But many of them, most of them I would say, when they heard the idiophones, there was no attempt to repeat the idiophone. It was almost as if the word, the way it sounded, was meant to evoke something, but not necessarily be a conventional representation of the meaning. So we noticed that right away, and that's absolutely fascinating. But of course, there's more things to discover.
Absolutely. Well, which gets at a question I just wanted to ask. Indeed, is talked a little bit how your research developed, and then we went down the track of idiophones, which is also still very much a focus of yours, with this study for sure indicating that. Where do you see the sort of meandering river of your research leading to in future years? Because you're very much still active in this area. Where does it go next?
Well, thank you for asking. I really want to get my archive of idiophones built up a little bit more. So I have an archive called Quechua Real Words. And you've actually made some contributions to it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to contribute.
Your sharp ear has caught many an idiophone in the things that we've been recording here this summer, so I appreciate that.
I will put a link to this as well in the description. It's a fascinating archive and living dictionary in a sense, isn't it?
I love that term. It is.
It's called Quechua Real Words.
An audiovisual dictionary.
Yeah, an audiovisual dictionary indeed. I was going to say, it does use the word Quechua, and I know we've already clarified that actually here it's normally called Kichwa. So I will put both spellings in the description, and you will be able to find it, also with the link, of course. No spelling required. But it's really a wonderful resource, and I would really encourage anyone who's interested in idiophones, in these sound symbolic utterances, or even just in the language itself of Kichwa, of Amazonian Kichwa varieties, to just check it out and peruse it, because there's already a lot up there. And as you said, we're trying to, you especially, but in any way I can, and other students who are currently here at, I should say we're currently in the Andes and Amazon Field School near Tena in Ecuador. And there are other students here who are doing various projects, and they're also contributing to this database / corpus / dictionary as well.
Thank you. They are indeed. And so one of the reasons I want to keep building it up is because I've noticed some interesting patterns in the use of gestures with idiophones, and I think I think the gestures add crucial information to idiophone semantics. And so I want to do more of what Mark has called expanding the margins of language, by including more gestures in the domain of what people are traditionally considering linguistic.
Absolutely, and I think this gets at a concept which I didn't think we'd bring up in this episode, but why not? Language with a capital L, and kind of what that means. For those of you who aren't primarily interested in linguistics, I think it's interesting to define that of course language very literally is of course just what we're speaking, etc. But language with a capital L, the way linguists and cognitive scientists tend to use it, and also many anthropologists, is as a whole kind of cognitive system. And the fact that it's a very expansive, just kind of, actually it's rather akin to the way most people use communication in general. Yes. I would say that, the way many people currently in these fields in academia use the word language. So that would absolutely, include all the signed languages, which are super rich and equally sort of complex, as they're just as complex as spoken languages, and the rich sort of gesture inventories that individual speakers and also whole cultures have, right?
Yes, that's also
intonation,
important.
Everything.
That is also important. In fact, a trip that I took recently, which you were also on, into Wow Tadero territory, brought this all home so clearly when we were interviewing speakers who are unused to working with anyone thinking about language with a capital L.
Yes.
So we spoke with one man, and we would try to elicit idiophones from him. Okay, so how does how does a howler monkey sound? Well, we got depictions that were so specific and so contextually rooted in, you know, the exact gestures that a howler monkey would use, the exact cries, the emotions. It was really difficult for me to even fathom writing down what he was uttering.
Absolutely.
Right?
The traditional pen and paper field linguist, let me get my notebook out. It's very hard to capture that, indeed.
Now, if we had asked him to tell a narrative, I'm sure he would have given us more conventionalized idiophonic depictions. But just eliciting idiophones themselves was such a challenge, and it was such a sober reminder of how much our fieldwork methods can sometimes determine what we find out.
Certainly, and certainly interesting, as you point out, that there's this kind of meta-analysis that some speakers have and other speakers don't seem to have about, okay, this is my language, this is what someone wants to hear when I'm asked a question about my language.
Exactly.
They just went for it, so to speak. You know, they're like, all right, you want a howler monkey? Here's a howler monkey. And it was almost identical to that same person actually later when we were on a hike actually up a sort of a very muddy hillside, you know, just up the land from the river, you know, just walking upland a bit. We were trying to find howler monkeys. To my great disappointment, we didn't find any. We were trying to find howler monkeys, and we were at a salt lick where they gathered.
Right.
And he was bellowing. The speaker was bellowing in the way, howling, I guess, in the way howler monkeys howl in these deep, deep tones, in an attempt to attract them. And this was actually what had also been elicited that morning when you were asking about the way howler monkeys perform, as it were. This gets back to this performative aspect.
Exactly.
It was like putting on a scene for us.
Right. It was incredibly vivid, and trying to write it down with pen and paper or keyboard and computer would be such a disappointment.
Yeah. Only a video would suffice.
Only a video.
Hence the need for the audiovisual corpus. Right. Well, we should get one started for WOW as well.
We really should.
We should say WOW. It sounds like wow in English, but it's WOW Terero is currently classified as a language isolate, and it's so it's not related to any other language allegedly, and it is spoken only in the Ecuadorian Amazon, I guess a little bit in Peru by some migrants, I've heard.
Okay.
But officially, I think only in Ecuador.
Officially only in Ecuador.
Yeah.
Right. About 3,000 speakers are said to speak it right now. It's exciting.
Fascinating. Would that, just to pose a hypothetical, would that be another future avenue for your research before your illustrious career comes to an end someday?
I would not rule it out, because I felt such a feeling of excitement when I was with these people in an area where civilization barely exists and their ways of lives are so closely grounded to the earth and nature, and reading the microsignals in their environment all around them. You could almost say that the rainforest is their library, and the curriculum is their land.
Absolutely.
The land, the birds, the flowers, the trees. They're brilliant people, and brilliant at reading and interpreting their environment. And I had that same sense of excitement when I did my dissertation research in this really remote area that I had to charter airplanes to get to. So this was a wonderful trip, and I actually have a commitment to go back there next summer. So.
Absolutely. Well, that's absolutely fascinating. Having gone sort of snaked through your career and what lies ahead, perhaps, what always lies ahead is the next generation. What would you say to the next generation of up-and-coming field researchers, linguists, anthropologists, you name it, whatever field denomination they may belong to? What would you say to them? What would be your advice and words of, I guess, encouragement perhaps too, but what is it that you would wish to impart to them?
So thank you for asking. I think what I would tell people to do is to believe in yourself more than I believed in myself, and have enough faith in your ability to interpret what is interesting as interesting. And take something that you're really, really interested in. Don't worry about what other people think is interesting, because someone will always think what you think is interesting is less interesting than it really is. So I've always been interested in idiophones. They were not exactly a mainstream area for research when I wrote my dissertation. I tried to argue for their importance to the grammar. And so I would say that whatever you are inclined to do, as long as it's something that you have a burning passion to investigate and know more about, go there and worry about how to make a living later on. Figure out what you're interested in, and then figure out how to make a living doing it.
Well, in this academic climate, I think that's the only choice.
The only choice.
No, I'm sure this too will pass in academia.
I think it will. It comes in waves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being interviewed. I really enjoyed our conversation, as I've enjoyed every conversation off camera too, but thank you very much for sitting down in front of the camera to share some of your wisdom from these years of field work and reflection and new encounters too, the exciting new possibilities with WOW Quechua studies, comparative studies, and the studies of mixed communities between the two may well become a new burgeoning field, and it's certainly one I'm interested in.
It deserves to be, for sure. Thank you so much, Austin, for having me. It's really been a privilege to be on your podcast and to know you, and I've been also really enjoyed and learned a lot from our conversations. Thank you.
Oh, the feeling's mutual. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the viewers and listeners, and I'm sure you'd all love to have Janis on the podcast again, so I would love to leave that door open for a future episode. But for now, thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.